Hello, welcome back to Getting Open with me, Andrea Miller. Oh my God, we got such a good show today. We are talking about conflict. Hey, wait, come back. You conflict avoidant types. No, this is for you. And honestly, no matter how you deal with conflict, because let's be real, few of us are great with conflict. No matter how you handle it, this show is going to rock your world because it is going to help you understand that not only can you deal with conflict more, if you will, effectively and productively, but it can help you get, really, sincerely, the opportunity to be the best version of yourself. And it's honestly, it's an opportunity hidden in plain sight that I know so many of us avoid. And let's be real, guys. The conflict in our world, in our personal lives, so often with our spouses, our kids, with coworkers, it's just getting worse. The data's really clear. And so I bring you this show with my full heart because for each of us to show up and manage conflict with greater grace and wisdom, it really is a game changer and a way to actually improve our health outcomes and the quality of our lives. So let's get into it. Oh my gosh, I am so excited to introduce our amazing guests, both smarty pants from Harvard and beyond, NYU, and just so many accolades between the two of them. I'm going to start with Bob Bordone. He is a senior fellow at Harvard Law School, founder and former director of the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program, former clinical professor of law at Harvard, and founder of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. We're also joined by his co-author, Joelle Salinas, MD, who is a behavioral neurologist, scientist, and clinical associate professor of neurology at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, founder and chief medical officer at Isaac Health, and former Harvard Medical School faculty. I'm feeling really intimidated. Can somebody else do the show? I might need some help.
Well, you won't feel that way for very long, Andrea. I assure you.
Okay. All right. We're going to start to break down. No, that's so funny. Guys, I am so excited about your new book on sale today, Conflict Resilience, Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. It is brilliant. I mean, the research, the thoroughness, the relatability, and the freaking timing could be better. Let me actually ask you this first thing. When did you start to write this?
Early pandemic.
What? That's crazy. Oh, you guys are not only all those other accolades, you're actually prescient. Because it matters.
Well, that's nice, Andrea. I'm not sure we're prescient because in some sense,
did I say prescient? I meant precious. No, you're both. You're both.
I mean, a lot of what we saw, what is happening now, we saw even a decade ago starting to happen, right? And
it's kind of almost like that, like the proverbial iceberg situation, right? Like there is so much below the waterline that we don't see. You guys were seeing kind of the above the waterline, like you say, a decade ago, and now it's just so much more obvious and in everybody's faces. I mean, you're obviously so passionate about the ability for this book to make the radical change that's required in our society. So I want to thank you for writing something amazing and so relevant at a time when, I think we used similar language. The social fabric is breaking down in America, and it's not just in politics. It is with families and the workplace, in college universities. I mean, it's systemic. Let's, before I get too excited and, I get into all the weed questions that I'm excited to get into, you guys say that conflict resilience is the ability to genuinely sit with and grow from conflict. Why? I mean, this feels like it's the heart of the book. Why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, so in some sense, as you say, I think this political moment just demonstrates this. But as we just live in a more pluralistic and diverse society, it is necessarily the case that we are going to have increasing differences. And truth of the matter is, even within a family, right, where we're all maybe literally genetically related, people have different experiences and differences. And um, just prerequisite to be able to live with each other means that we have to have some capacity to sit with that discomfort of when we disagree, when we don't see eye to eye, either about what's true, what's right, what we should do, what's moral. Because, I'm someone who spent a lot of many, many years teaching negotiation and problem solving and conflict resolution. And I believe in all of those things. They're really important. But we can't get to any of those if we don't have just the human capacity to enter into the heat of the kitchen, right? To enter into the challenge of the conflict. And
But yeah,
so,
you're it's
yeah.
like you are addressing that systemic thing that just feels like, I mean, when I think about cancel culture and, you use some great examples just about how, um, people are either shutting down and, like, withdrawing and holding back, or, like, I think you used the word battering ram, to try to win the argument. And we know how, pervasive that is. So I do appreciate it. I feel like what you're trying to do is saying, "Hey, it's like we gotta foundationally fix this before, like you say, the problem solving, the negotiation." I also love the point you guys make. I mean, as a really practical matter, when you think about your ability to negotiate and problem solve, whether it's personally or professionally, you leave money on the table, you miss opportunities. I mean, really practically, if you don't have that capability to sit with the discomfort and figure things out, right? So again, I just think your book is a really practical one. Um, so so that's the why. So explain, and you've given a little taste, but when it comes to what is conflict resilience, and how can people use it? I feel like you've got a three-step program here, and I don't want to get like too pushy here. Like, tell me everything all at once, but would love to give people the meat of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in here. Before we go into even the framework, I think it's this combination of the skill set and the mindset. Yeah, and I think I'll start with the mindset because that really is about starting to become much more aware of your relationship with conflict, how you perceive it, how you recognize it in others, how you're able to kind of hold that conflict. Overall, like this combined set of things, we call it kind of conflict tolerance. But it's also kind of having an orientation to moving toward conflict to some degree, seeing conflict not as a sign of failure or weakness or that things are wrong, but as seeing it as an opportunity for connection, right? You can't have connection without conflict. Seeing it as an opportunity for creativity, innovation, vibrancy, um, and I think that orientation already begins to help to improve that whole element of conflict resilience, which is to be able to sit with that discomfort because you're already kind of becoming not only more cognizant of kind of that dynamic, but also you're much more kind of uh, aligned or poised towards that conflict when otherwise you might want to just avoid it altogether or like the battering ram example. I mean, we call these in the book kind of our default reactions. And we give the examples of the 5 F's, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and fester.
Hang on, I just want you to slow down there because I think a lot I didn't know about fester. I learned that from you guys, right? I knew about the other 4, but fight, flight, we all know about those 2. Freeze, I think a lot of us know about, and then fawn, like you're kinda kissing butt because, like, that's what's comfortable to you, and then fester, is that like you're analyzing, you're just, like, stewing, or what is that?
It's
Or
that kind of, I'm not going to talk about it right now, but I'm going to let that resentment build up. And then I'm going to say everything is fine. And then several months later, I'm going to blow a hole at the side of my neck and present you with 100,000 grievances about everything that's been going on.
I feel like fester is kind of a almost variation of flight.
Mm,
Right? It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
what happens after you flee and are still holding on to it as opposed to a letting it go. And letting it go is not always necessarily good because if it's really important to you, and this is one of the things we really talk about in our book, right? if there's a side of you that feels like this is important and a side that feels like you don't want to get into trouble and you flee, well, the side that doesn't want to get into trouble, they've had their interests met. The side that feels like it's important is still stewing.
Well, and there's a lack of integrity in that, right? I mean, and I think, just when I think about, like, the times when I've fleed and festered, I've done all 5, and I probably do them all, like, more than I care
So
to
have most of us.
care to admit. But I think to myself, like, "Oh, Andrea, you're out of integrity. Like, you gotta own it, sister." And that, honestly, when I think about my relationship with conflict, I feel like it's been transformative to be so much more, willing to to be open, and, the points that you guys make in terms of, recognizing that it's like that's where the good stuff is. And again, just for anybody listening, this isn't just for smarty pant lawyers and executives. This is for moms and dads. This is for teachers. This is for, leaders in any kind of organization and individuals. Because everybody has conflict every single day. I think about me and my teenage kids.
Yeah,
Like,
and I
I
think,
need to
Andrea,
apply all this to them, right?
yeah, Andrea, that's totally right. And I think one of the things that I'm imagining at least some of your listeners, right, when they were hearing what I would call extremely wise words from Joelle, but I can imagine some of them were like, wait a minute, like conflict isn't good. And why should I engage across a divide that feels like a chasm with people I don't like when I can barely hold things together anyway? And I think one of the things that we really try to talk about with a combination of the brain science that Joelle brings to this, and then really kind of the human side of working in a lot of different contexts over many, many years around problem solving, is that there is, what we call a BBO, or a bigger, better offer on the other side. Because the cost of the avoidance, the cost of going into our cocoons of comfort in the moment can feel like low, but in the long term actually means, really, it's kind of a slow kill on our personal relationships. And I think one of the things we're seeing right now is a accelerated kill on the very fabric of our country, of organizations. Because when we stay in our silos, because we think there's nothing we're going to agree upon, and this is exhausting and this is hard, what we then start to do is demonize, and we dehumanize, and we make the other person quite thin, and then we can't do basic kinds of things together that we just need to do. Moreover, right, the very act of coming together along a difference, even if we don't reach an agreement on that difference, is actually a way to build connection. It is a way to build some trust, because none of the yeses mean much until you have that first no.
Yeah. Well, totally, and I think about that, the cost that you described, from avoiding the hard conversations to missing out on the chance for disconnection. I've heard, and, you guys reference it in the book. I've heard you guys talk about it on other podcasts. We're in a loneliness epidemic, and it only seems to be getting worse. And it feels like, for people that are just like, F it, like, I haven't heard demonize and dehumanize. I like that combination. But I feel like, what we do, back to the point of the cost, like, we pay a big price when we say, well, I don't, I'm going to just write that person off, right? Because it feels bad, and you can sit there and justify and rationalize your decision. But, like, as Bessel says, the body keeps a score, right? So it does feel like it is a stress response. So, the 5 Fs that you guys talked about, in that either the avoiding or the battering, like, you're paying a price whether you want to admit it or not, I feel like, is the freaking answer. And on the other side, which you guys have just so beautifully articulated, there is so much room to learn and to grow. And it's like, it's scary to get into conflict for so many of us, and yet, if you can do it successfully, there's nothing better than feeling seen, and, feeling like you've got that connection. But it's not theory. Like, you can only get the connection if you're willing to kind of show up and engage. right? So it does feel like there's just a huge opportunity cost for people to avoid or better. Sorry, Joelle, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just to say, Bob had mentioned this BPO. So this is the concept from work of psychiatrist Judd Brewer, but it's all about kind of paying attention to what is the bigger reward to change your behavior and to do something different. Our brain creates these behavioral loops, right? These reward and reinforcements loops where we might feel some kind of a discomfort, right? Then that can come from potential conflict or disagreement, that kind of threat, and that can be very physical. And that relates to our brain's perception of potential threats, and everybody's kind of sensitivity to register a potential threat is different from the next person for all sorts of reasons, often kind of dating back to like their childhood. And once we feel that kind of, not just that negative experience, using the same kind of brain wiring that we use for experiencing physical pain, but also our alarm system in our brain can go off. These salient systems, once we have enough discomfort, to say, pay attention to this. And so we will immediately react with one of those 5S, those default reactions, to decrease how bad it feels. And that your brain will then register, okay, I did that thing to make me feel less bad, so I'm going to do more of that. Remember, do more of that. And so this BBO helps to short circuit that a little bit to then say, actually, there's a bigger reward here. There's something better here to then bring on these more deliberative systems rather than these very reactive systems in the brain. So that way you can do something that is different from what you've typically done, which oftentimes will be one of those 5Fs.
Yeah, well, I can't help but wonder. I mean, as I understand it, 95% of our um, um, brain is unconscious. So we got just a little, and you tell me because you know way better than me, but there's a relatively small amount of our brain power that's conscious. And I've heard somebody describe it's like my 95% that's triggered by X, Y, and Z is interacting with your 95%. And that's where so much of the problem is happening, right? I mean, so it's like we're kind of reaction. In fact, it's occurred to me that we're in a nervous system epidemic, right? I mean, I just feel like you look at all these different angles and it's back to, okay, what's the root cause? Our nervous systems, I mean, there's an anxiety epidemic, right? What is anxiety? Fear, right? What is fear? Your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, obviously, in overdrive. And so I can't help but wonder if our 95% are going at it, like, how do we stay, more conscious and more rational?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely part of what's going on is, our brains evolved as fortune-telling machines to help to kind of predict what might happen, and it can be wrong, to help us to take an action to help us survive and avoid potential threats. But that's all fed in by past experience and memories, and we all have very different past experiences. We've all had different moments with conflict that were either very positive or very negative. And one of the things that we kind of talk about in the book as a way to really, just at the very begin that process, in addition to just being aware of it, which sounds very easy, but actually awareness is more than half the battle here. And what can be helpful is to just pause and take a breath. Just that pause. And if you can take a breath, we talk about some different breathing exercises. One of the ones that really like is psychic sighing, where you're taking a deep breath in through the nose and you do a little top off at the top and then a slow exhale.
This is Huberman talks about it. Can you just walk us through that? And I'm happy to do it with you. But I mean, when I think about this as a hack that punches way above its weight. In fact, there are times like I'll kind of overreact. I'm like, oh, why didn't I do this? Like what is it called? Not psychedelic sigh. Cyclic sigh. Yeah. Okay, so tell me how to do it, and I want everybody listening. You do it with us.
Yeah. So I mean, I love this because it was compared with other breathing techniques. Like some people might know box breathing, and it actually outperformed that, and even better than mindfulness meditation alone. So you start with taking, and you might want to be seated for this because you might get lightheaded if you do it too much. So you take a deep breath in through your nose, and then when you get to the very top, take in an extra little top off, and then breathe out slowly.
Wow, you do feel a little lightheaded, but you blow out through your mouth, right? Can you do out through your nose or just in through your nose? So I'm gonna do it one more time. Everybody do it with me. We're gonna go real deep. Yeah, no, you feel it.
Hmm. It's quite powerful, and physiologically, it's been shown it lowers your heart rate, lowers your respiratory rate, and also things like lower your blood pressure. I mean, it starts to really activate parts of your nervous system that counteract that 5F kind of system, like the
Yeah,
this
yeah, I would
adrenaline
expect that
rush.
probably is kicking in your parasympathetic, right? I mean,
Exactly,
your
that's
rest
exactly
and
it.
digest.
You got it.
Mhm,
You got it.
mhm.
And the other thing to
I'm
say,
also a little bit
Andrea,
of a nerd when it comes to this stuff. That's
yeah,
I
no,
love it.
yeah, you know this stuff, Andrea. But here's the other thing to say, right? Because I think two other things I would just say. One is just because I'm imagining some of your listeners are like, okay, but like when I'm in a conflict, I'm not going to suddenly do cyclic slide because they're not. And also, they can take a pause. Um, and the pause is in itself quite powerful. There's a fabulous case study that was done with former US Trade Representative Charlene Barshevsky, who won the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School's Great Negotiator Award many years ago. And she tells this story of being in late night negotiations at 2 a.m. with the head trade negotiator for China, who basically lunges across the table. And that's the word she uses. That's not my word. That's her word. Lunges across the table.
That seems pretty unusual.
Very
You don't
unusual.
expect that from a, Chinese diplomat.
Lunges across the table, bangs his hand, and says, "That's it. Take it or leave it." And she talks about how she paused for about 40 seconds, which in an international trade negotiation is like, an eternity, right? And she's like, and the way she tells the story is quite funny because she says, my team thought like, oh, she's so calm, she's so collected. And she was like, my heart was thumping. Like I didn't know what to do. But that 30 or 40 seconds actually gave her a chance to recollect herself so that she could say something that was productive, right? And if you think about many negotiations where it's just either, a fighting escalating, right? We don't see that at all. And maybe it makes for good TV, but it makes for really bad conflict handling.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like, and you guys talk about this too. It's like somebody has to go first. Like it starts with each of us, and if each of us, and I mean, I'm also, like I said, a mom. I mean, I think of what I'm teaching my kids, and this idea of just saying, okay, let me be the one to start with a little bit of restraint and having that wisdom to take the pause. I mean, but it takes practice. So just as far as, in fact, let me actually rewind because you guys have the 3-step process. I wanna make sure we're really setting the foundation before we get too much into the weeds. Um, what is that 3-step process? And then I would love for you guys to share more, I mean, you guys talk about, like, even just now, Charlene's like, her heart's racing. Like you can feel it. Like if you're tuning in, you can feel it physiologically. It's your body saying, whoa, right? A lot of us ignore it at our own peril. But anyway, I feel like I keep talking.
No,
So
no. So we could just say that quickly because the first of the three is related to some of what we've been saying, right? Which and I think is so important. It's the first of the 3 steps. There's 3 steps: name, explore, commit. But step one, the name, is really all about ourselves. You know, we're imagining that many people are going to be like, oh, this book will help me with my teenager, my mother-in-law, my boss, the local dog catcher. And hopefully it will, right? But the starting point is the self. And so very specifically identifying what are those kind of internal conflicts that we have that we often don't address or name explicitly that then make us less efficacious across the negotiation table. How do we give each of them a voice instead of an evaluation? How do we find each of them, give them an opportunity to get a hearing? That's really important. That self-awareness piece increases our ability to be more mindful and responsive in the heat of the conflict.
Yeah, and that's
Uh,
what you said, Joelle, that more than half is 50%. All right, I'm gonna put you guys each on the spot if I can, and I'll go too. What for each of you, what is that thing that you never do anymore, I'm sure, because now you're masters of all that stuff. But what did you used to do that you had to name that prevented you from being more resilient in conflict?
I could start. I mean, for me, in romantic relationships, whenever there'd be a potential for any kind of disagreement, my first reaction is to actually lean on the Fawn piece, is to say, "Oh yeah, sure, that sounds great. No problem."
You're so
I mean,
beautiful, baby.
yeah, yeah, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and it works in the moment, right? It works in the moment because it diffuses the tension. It feels good, and yeah, well,
Yeah.
it feels
I mean,
good to
eventually,
yeah,
yeah, no, it feels
exactly,
good then, but then it feels bad later because 'cause you're
exactly.
like, "Oh, I'm such a wuss."
And it builds and it builds and it builds, and that's I mean, I'm on the side of more on the side of avoidance when it comes to conflict. And Bob knows this quite well. So the work of the book. I mean, it's a life's work, right? To start to reprogram around it, but it's a lot of catching yourself when you're doing it and trying to kind of build those skills from the lowest kind of level of intensity upward. But there's still some certain conflicts right now, right? That I like. It takes a lot of work for me to really kind of like take those breaths and be like, okay, I guess I'll do it.
Well, and I appreciate your making that point because for everybody listening, it's like, it's freaking hard. I just between the economy and just all the crazy political stuff and, um, uh, there's just so much I mean, I feel like everybody's just more burdened than ever. And so to the extent that you're even saying somebody with your credentials and background that it's still hard for you, it's like, okay, thanks for telling the truth, right? It's just this is a lift, right? But it's a lift wholly worth making. To me, I feel like you cross the river into, oh my gosh, life can be genuinely transformative if you can get that conflict resilience as something you're doing mostly pretty well, right? Nobody's going to aim for perfection, but mostly pretty well to me is way better than, never or mostly pretty crappy. Okay, Bob, what's yours?
yeah, I mean, it's very easy for me. I have a very particular kind of blow up. Um, so we talk in our book about something called limbic irritability, right? That moment when you are kind of not, uh, it's like the moment when you want to hit reply to all, and you do hit reply to all. Um,
Don't do it,
so
Bob. Don't do
We'll
it.
do it, yeah. So mine occurs in a very specific domain, which it is when I feel that my sign of autonomy or sense of freedom has been unjustly impinged upon. And it's and so especially if there's like a justice component to it. My mode then is to go into a defensive fighting that is not productive. Um, I would say the my ability to not do that is only moderately lower than it was 15 years ago, but my ability to kind of name with that level of precision, has improved, and I think that's because of just another it's related to some of the things we're talking about around self-awareness, but it's really around, finding opportunities to be self-reflective, even journal, so that you start to notice the patterns. And I just want to say one more thing, Andrew, because I think it's really, I'm imagining not knowing your listeners, but like when you mentioned the economy or like just kind of, we're just trying to get by every day.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress in the
And
world and in
there's
our
a
lives.
way in which I'm imagining for some people that becomes the excuse for not engaging these really hard issues.
Mm. Oh,
And
I love it. Oh,
yeah,
Bob,
what
that's
I would
awesome.
just say is I'm both sympathetic, really sympathetic to that, and also to say that it's also part of the reason why we are where we are. Um, and if we don't individually and collectively work to make the change, it will not get better and it will not go away. So it is within our actual power. And I think this is one of the big lessons, hopefully for us in the book, is wherever you are on this, whether you think you could solve the Ukraine-Russia situation in 24 hours, or whether you think you could not negotiate yourself out of a paper bag on your own, you can get better from where you're at. And it's worth the effort.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I feel like the ability to foster those connections with another person, but even just going back, Joelle, to your example, it's like, and I promised I would out myself too. I am I'm both I'm fight and flight. I'm like so type A, and then I'm like, oh, I'm running, and often at the same time. It's like,
But I think, Andrea, a lot of us are, because it depends on the kind of conflict. So I want to hear your story, but just to say you're not alone there.
yeah, no, I mean, I say this, and just again referring back to what you were saying, Joelle, and even in your case, Bob. I mean, the times I have not replied all, I'm like, effing thank God I didn't, and I'm proud of myself, right? And the times when I've I have advocated for myself, or I've kind of towed the line, like really having to summon my courage. It's back to that integrity thing. I feel better when I step it up, right? And I think about me personally as a mom, as an executive, as somebody active in the community. I feel like, you know what, if I'm doing this better, not perfectly, but better, I mean, that's the kind of ripple effect that I hope to have, right? And the easier thing and the freaking lazy thing is just to be like, "Bah, F it." I'm tired, I'm busy. And by the way, every now and then I do say I'm tired, I'm busy, and I check out, right? And I want to give everybody permission to do that sometimes. But Bob, your point's a really good one. Kicking the can down the road is not a great answer to these kind of really pernicious systemic issues that do have a serious consequence. And Joelle, in one of the interviews I heard you talk about a reference that I like to make too, that being lonely is as bad or worse than being obese or smoking a lot of cigarettes every day, right? So again, the costs of avoidance, or the costs of not being, sort of truthful and resilient, there is a real cost to everybody. Okay, so we got number one. So it's name that thing and I want everybody listening, just guys, name it in your head, right? Like, just name it in your head. Like, let's make the world a better place together. So now what is number two?
Joelle, you take number two.
Yeah. So number two is explore. I think the first part of explore is, whenever we're in a conflict, it's very easy to really put a lot of the blame around the tension of the conflict on the other person. They're obstinate, they're illogical, they're not paying attention, they don't listen to me.
It's always them, blame, blame, blame.
And, one of the things that we suggest with the book is that you actually want to start with something that you have control over, which is yourself. Really looking internally to really explore kind of what are the tensions that are at play for you that make you feel kind of the discomfort that you do with this conflict. Bob alluded to this before, that, these different voices that you have going on. For example, let's say you're trying to ask for a raise with your boss. And that already starts to make your palms sweat, your heart starts to race. And there's a part of you that wants to advocate for yourself, that that really wants to be acknowledged for the value that you're bringing for the work that you've been doing. And there's this other part of you that wants to be a good employee, that doesn't want to make waves, that doesn't want to cause trouble. And so there's an opportunity there to actually give voice to both of those sides. And you wouldn't have known that if you hadn't have reflected on what is behind this tension here. And sometimes actually giving voice to that in the exchange can be quite powerful. So for example, you might say, this type of a conversation and this topic is very uncomfortable for me. There's a part of me that wants to do X, and there's a part of me that wants to do Y. So it might take me a little bit to really respond in this conversation. And that alone can be really helpful in kind of decreasing the temperature for not just for you, but for the other person too.
That takes some courage.
It
right?
does. It does take some courage. Go ahead, Bob. I see you wanting to say something.
No, finish.
I was going to say the other two pieces to explore is related to interests. So you want to understand the interests of the other person. So we talk about deep listening. It's a very specific skill set, but the idea is to be very genuinely curious about the position of the other side, and what's the values, what's the information that's feeding into the headline that they're coming to you with, and not as a sign of endorsement of what they're saying, but really just to understand, what are the things that are motivating them, because that'll help to then inform your response. You can actually help the relationship, and the response is the other piece of this, which is the effective assertion. So being able to kind of voice your own perspective and your own interests and your own values in a way that's quite full-throated and is authentic, and that you can be kind of accountable to yourself. And there's this kind of dance between the listening and the assertion that's important. We talk about kind of see and be seen, right? It's both, and you get better at doing both when you do both of them. They work together.
Totally. Bob, did you want to chime into that?
Yeah, no, I mean, yes. I mean, well, on that point, just to say you can't actually be effective in assertion until you've done deep listening. For the reason why you can't be advocating in a way that is meaningful to the other person in the conversation or the negotiation until you know what's meaningful to them. If you assume what's meaningful to them, right? It's like me trying to sell you a Mini Cooper, and what I don't realize, you have 4 toddlers, 2 dogs, like, so I might be making all sorts of persuasive comments about the merits of the car I have on offer. It's just not anything you're interested in. I mean, that's a non-controversial example, right? But you have to do that work. No, the other thing I was just going to say about what Joelle was saying about bringing kind of the 2 different voices, right? On the one hand, it's really important for me to raise this. On the other hand, I'm worried. That is a really brave move. But part of what makes it brave is that it's changing the script on the traditional kind of negotiation or conflict you've had. Because what's convenient about the standard fight over where we're spending Thanksgiving, or who was right or wrong about household chores, or why those fill in the blank other side of the political aisle people are so bad, is that as painful and awful as the conversation goes, we know where it ends. But as soon as we do something different, that creates some risk. The risk that it will go worse. But here's the other thing, right? It also creates opportunity. It creates possibility. It creates something that feels more real. And I know for myself, I'm actually in the process of, I'm on a particular board where I have been the minority person suggesting that a long-term staff person that should go. And in truth, I think a lot of people feel that way, but have been uncomfortable saying it. And I was also uncomfortable saying it. But one of the amazing things about having said it is that I don't feel any stress anymore.
Truth sets you free, baby.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because it's like there is back to like this cost inside of our bodies. It's like you say the truth. I mean, and to be fair, saying your truth in a way that I always say to my kids, like, say it so I can hear it. Like if you're not shouting at me, you may tell me something that I don't love, but I can hear you if you're saying it kind of sincerely. Well, I wanted to add what you were saying, Joelle, about the Explorer. You guys have also talked in interviews and so forth about the importance of empathy in all of this. And I just feel like that really needs to be underscored. And that takes some digging and takes some maturity, right? When you just like want to gouge the other person's eyes out, it's like you almost have to, the vast majority of the time, assume goodwill, right? And that can feel hard. But back to what you were saying, Bob, about like the demonizing and dehumanizing, if we're showing up and it's like that person is wrong, and they're to blame, like it's game over, like out of the gate, right? So I do feel like that willingness to just open your heart and be empathetic and be, to your point, like really curious versus bullshit curious, right? Like,
Yeah,
do I
it doesn't.
really am
You
I
just
really willing to learn?
and
Uh-huh.
that is the hard work, right? Can you be curious about something? It does like just some part of their story, some part of the way they see it that way. Um, because I think until you can do that, then the behaviors, and we do give skills and we try to talk about that, but they will look trained.
Yeah, well,
Um,
and the thing that I have learned in my life is, back to what you were saying about changing that dynamic, Bob, it's like if I shift into being really curious and really listening, I mean, that changes my energy. It changes my body language, right? It just does. And as we know, 93% of our communication is nonverbal, right? So when you're deeply listening, even if it's not conscious to the other person, if you're sincerely curious and empathetic, just bringing that vibe forth, that changes, right? Now, you may have to hang in there for a little while and so forth, but I can't personally, having gotten it wrong many times, as I show up differently, it's like, oh, that change showing up differently changes the dynamic. But let me ask you this, as much as I've, tried to get it right and so forth, there are people in my life that are so freaking defensive, like, I can't even take it, like, I try so hard. I mean, I just whiffed on something recently with somebody that I was close to, tried to have a good conversation. This person got defensive so fast. I'm like, "All right, I gotta go." Like, like, basically hung up. I'm like, "I gotta go." Click, you know? It's not my finest moment, but it's like, that was triggering to me. So what do you do when the other person is insisting on, they're insisting on their being a victim, they're insisting on, it's that defensiveness. That's hard to get through to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a so there's an element of where listening can be helpful to kind of get to it, but if they're not really engaging in the dialogue, that actually kind of moves us beautifully into the commit step, which is really taking the time to think through whether it's worth staying or going, whether it's worth engaging in the dialogue at that time or moving away. And we talk a little bit about kind of ways to sort through that specific question. But I think one kind of straightforward way to kind of briefly encapsulate that is to, for yourself, understand whether the other person's acting in good faith or not.
Mhm. Well, here's what my take would be. I think, and I've dealt with this in my close family and distant, like friends and people that I've worked with or have worked for me. I think they're actually acting in good faith, but it's like there are these freaking blind spots, right? And it's like they're like you don't know what you don't know, right? So it's not that I think they're bad actors. It's just that they kind of lack that self-awareness or emotional maturity. And that feels like the thing that's really hard to come over. I mean, listen, even listening to, I'm like, okay, deep listening, like, let me be a little bit more patient and try to deeply listen. But man, sometimes it's like, ooh, it's hard.
but Andrea, maybe there's some diagnostic questions even there. I mean, I think everyone probably listening to you right now, someone's coming into their mind about this.
Yeah,
Certainly
like,
for me,
same. I just
right?
want to.
And so one diagnostic question is how important is it for you to have some engagement with this person around this issue? So to what extent is if it's keeping you up at night, if it's still bothering you, right? That's a sign. As opposed to it's a frustrating, but whatever. The second thing though, I think that another
Hang on, but Bob, I just
yeah,
wanna go back just so people
yeah,
get it.
go, yeah.
The how important is it to me? So say that I'm having this conflict with a friend about a particular topic, that's what I should be asking is, "Hey, is it worth dying on this hill?" Like, just really having to assess, "I care about this person, I'm not canceling them or whatever, going no contact, but maybe I just don't engage on this topic." Is that the
Yeah,
question?
like what is it like for me, what is it that is what do I want from this? Is it to be right? Is it for them to see some point? Is it to learn about them, right? Because if the purpose is ultimately to be right, then it's going to be much harder than
Mhm.
if the
Well, I
purpose
feel
is.
like if the purpose is to be right, you've lost.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I agree with you on that, right? But sometimes that's what it is for the person. That's the frustration, right? Or at least it's not so much to be right. They might say, well, I just want them to admit this. I just want them to admit this one thing, which is in a way persuasion, right? But I think the other thing about this, right, is that there can be a shift or a shift in what the conversation is. So specifically, I know a number of situations where I have repeatedly tried to get into a conversation with somebody who is defensive or avoidant or like we're just going the same circle. But a conversation that you sometimes can get them into is what is their experience of that conversation? What is it like for them when I bring up fill in the blank? Uh,
Can you, yeah, can you use an example? Because I'm
yeah, I
kind of,
mean,
it's feeling a little
so
theoretical to me.
let's just say it's how we were treated as kids by mom and dad, right? Like with a sibling. And we always get into, whatever. Mom was generous, no, she was selfish and she just let you get away with murder. And it feels really unproductive. And there's a side of us that feels like mom is getting attacked. And so we really want to have this conversation. And the sibling was, treated like a brat, right? So it's really bad. But the thing you maybe can do is to say to the sibling, hey, we often have a conversation where we disagree about what mom and dad did growing up. And I don't actually want to have that conversation with you. But one thing I'm really curious about, and I wonder if you'd be willing to have this conversation, is what has your experience of our conversations around this been like for
That's
you?
what I thought you were saying. Okay.
Um, which that can be quite connecting.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, but and the thing that I just want to emphasize there is it's like honoring whatever that is, right? Because I've gotten into situations before where I'm like saying how I feel, and I have another person saying that's wrong. I'm like, you can't tell me my feelings are wrong. That is totally subjective, and I get to tell you, right? But I love that because I feel like it just gives. I mean, to me, that you know, creating like offering that psychological safety to a person, saying, "What's your experience?" You know, again, sincerely with an open heart, like, oh, I want somebody to ask me that. Like, I want to ask somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, you can instantly feel like, okay, there's room for connection here.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
the
often
conversation. I was
yeah,
just
go
say it's
ahead.
just a conversation about the conversation.
Exactly. Which is a cool ninja move. I kind of like that.
Well, and what's amazing is what you often hear, right, is a set of things that you're also feeling. And it gives you a chance to share that as well. Feeling unheard, unseen, diminished, like it goes really badly. Whatever comes up, right? And then you could just end it there and say, gosh, yeah, this has been, I'm so sorry to hear that. And that's not been my intention. But sometimes you can say, so I wonder whether, is this a conversation that both of us might want to engage at another time? And if so, what ideas do you have on how we could do that better? Hard stop. That's what they say. They might say, I have an idea. You agree with me all the time. Right? I mean, but they might say, well, A, B, and C. Maybe it's a time issue. Maybe it's a location issue. Maybe it's the way in which it comes up. Whatever it might be. Maybe it's a particular thing that roils you. Like, so for me, like one of the things with my partner that can roil me is when he will say something like, this is what the average person does. That roils me because I don't like to be average. So I
Oh,
find it to be not persuasive.
Bob Bordone is not mediocre, people. I just want you to know that from the show.
Right?
Oh,
And
that's
I
so
get
funny.
like he's trying to say you're outside the, whatever, the curve. But what it does for me is be like, you're trying to make me average. And if you want an average person, I'm worse at things and I'm better.
I'm not the guy.
I'm not the
Yeah.
guy.
No,
I'm not the guy.
interesting.
So stop
But
making that
that's cool
argument.
that you know I mean, but that's actually a cool, very specific example, and good to share that with your partner, right? Because I'm sure it wasn't intended, for that to be the trigger, right? I mean, so I love that. Okay, hang on. I don't think we got to the third one. Did we get to commit entire? I
But
don't think we really dug
Joel
into
was
commit.
talking about it, but maybe he'll say some more about it. Joel did a very nice seg into it.
Yeah, so the whole point around the explore step is this point about whether you stay in the
No, commit.
conversation.
You mean commit,
Oh
Joelle.
yeah, sorry, commit.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, okay, so just to recap, because I feel like we're kind of zigging and zagging. So we got 3 steps. First is name it, your own thing, fight, flight, freeze, fester, da, da, da. Then explore, you're deeply listening, right? I wrote it down. You are, effective assertion, right? You're empathy. I've thrown that in there just because I can't help myself. And then, right, to kind of how you're showing up in the dynamic. And now we're on to step number 3.
Yes, that's commit. Commit. So commit is the whether stay or go. With asking yourself if the engagement is in good faith or not. So in that example that you had given about the person was very defensive, commit can be really helpful in helping to sort through, whether you want to just say, this isn't a good time to engage in this, or maybe this isn't a relationship that makes sense for me to kind of really go through the effort, right, of engaging in this really difficult thing, or there's something to be gained here for this relationship, or something to be gained in the bigger picture that it's worth kind of sorting through the awkwardness or the discomfort of it. And this is where kind of Bob's kind of diagnostic questions, I think, can be really helpful, right? Which is, what is it about this dialogue that is important to me? If there is anything that's really important, right? And then if you do decide, right, that it's not worth kind of continuing to engage, then you have to have like another conversation with yourself, which is kind of, now that I don't necessarily want to engage in this, what is there that I necessarily want to preserve from this? Is there some interest there that is still worth it? Or do I just kind of cut away completely?
Mhm. Got it.
And
Well,
there's kind of commit at different levels, right? There's kind of, we talk about commit to an agreement on something or a negotiation, right? That's one level at then there's the commit to, do we want to continue to engage on an issue? We haven't reached an agreement, but we still want to have conversations about this issue. Then there might be a commit, which is, we're not going to agree, and I don't want to talk about this anymore, but there's still this experience leads me to say I still want to stay in relationship in the following ways. Um, and on that last piece, like, we acknowledge that there are levels of ability to choose, in fact. That is to say that if it's your boss, I mean, you may not be able to quit tomorrow morning, but you can make a decision to start to look for other work. Um, if it's your sister, you can still decide you don't want to see your sister much, but you probably can't. I mean, she's always going to be your sister, and you may have to bump into them at certain times in your life. But we offer some diagnostic to how do you make those decisions um, in a way that is both conflict resilient, but not subjecting yourself to ongoing real harm or trauma, because we don't want to be misheard as suggesting that conflict resilience means sitting in the discomfort of trauma and harm, because that's not what we mean.
Yeah, and that I feel like to me, that's an interesting gray area because let's face it, this whole business of going no contact has become even more prevalent. And yeah, I totally get there are extremes of abuse and an unwillingness to take accountability and so forth. But it feels like there is just such a lack of tolerance. Um, on the other side, it's like it feels like that nuclear option is becoming further and further, more and more prevalent. And rather than having that ability to do, particularly step number 2, where you're really exploring versus saying, I'm just going to shoot that person, or that's it. Right. Which people, again, you do at your peril. Something that, occurred to me while I was reading through the book and watching some of your other clips and so forth. There's a book called, and a kind of a topic that's been out there maybe for a handful of years called the comfort crisis. And it just feels like what you guys have identified is a continuation of that. We all have air conditioning and Netflix, and like everything is on demand. We get what we want when we want it. There is very little discomfort in a lot of our lives and, in basic ways. And it just makes me wonder, we have so much effing control, right? I can get my Amazon, in 3 hours and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it
Oh,
just
Andrea,
makes me,
your insight into this is spot on. I mean, it's part of what I started to observe as a difference between the Harvard Law student of 2010 and 2015. And there was this moment when I started to think about this idea of conflict resilience where it really hit home for me. And had nothing to do with conflict. It was a talk that I went to on opioid use. And specifically, it was saying, of course, doctors and pharma have a lot to do with this. But you know what they were responding to? They were responding to a market of Americans who said, I don't want to feel any pain at all. Make it go away. And the thing is, none of us want to feel pain, but including conflict, right? But there is something in there, again, that if you can become more aware, if you can take some of the brain hacks that, Joel and his world and brain science and neuroscience have on offer, if you can also see the possibility of that bigger, better offer, that say that this is the path to connection. The move I make to preserve the relationship is just a slow kill. It's not serving me. It's not serving them. It's not serving my company or my family or my country.
well, yeah, I feel like this discomfort with discomfort, it just feels like the slow, insidious, kind of like boiling the frog, where it's just, we're not even aware that has occurred, right? And so I just feel like it's back to the awareness being more than half the battle to say, "Ooh, I'm gonna be a whole," it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, the hygiene hypothesis. There's so much, in biology and so forth that's how we get stronger, right? But it takes a lot of I feel like it takes that awareness and deciding this is what I'm gonna do because it's good for me and hopefully good for those around me. I'm sensitive to the time. I know we're already over. Oh my god, how did that happen? I have so many more questions. There's
Time
so much
flies
more
when
to
you're
dig
having
into with you
fun.
guys. Thank you so much for being on the show. Do you guys each have time for one more minute to kind of give your final takeaway that if there was just one thing that our listeners could do after listening to the show, I would super appreciate it. Joel, do you have a
Absolutely.
sec to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if there's one thing that you do, I would say just become more aware, really pay attention to what you're experiencing as conflict and what's going on in your body. And I think that alone actually begins to kind of adjust a lot of what's going on in your brain to be able to develop a lot of these skills and especially that mindset around handling conflict.
Yeah, I love that. Bob?
Yeah, I think it's similar, but also just to really believe in the power of conflict to be a source of connection, and also in your capacity to improve with this wherever you are, and that the effort is really worth it for you, both professionally but also relationally.
Yeah, I know I didn't write the book, but I have to chime in. I can't help myself. I just think about my own life where it was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I engaged because I learned something about myself or I learned something about that other person that surprised me. And we all, I mean, here's the thing, we all have blind spots and you don't know what you don't know. Right? And so when I think about these opportunities that you guys have set up, but it's so kind of such a passion point for me when I think about this is how we grow and become the best versions of ourselves. It's by being challenged and opening our hearts and minds. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been humbled. I'm like, oh crap. I had a different perception of myself and the conflict in a relationship, it was humbling, in some cases laid me bare, and it was like, "Oh, snap. I can own that, and now I don't have to hide it. Now I can integrate that part of myself." You know what I mean? Like, it feels like what you guys are talking about so punches above the weight of how we become the best version of ourselves, the truest, again, back to the integrity thing. And so I love what you guys are doing. I'm so grateful that you were on my show. I wish we could talk longer. When you have your next book, come back and we'll book 2 hours.
Andrea, thank you so much for
Thank
having us.
you.
This was really, really fun.
This
Oh,
has been
fun.
super fun. All right, good luck. I hope it's a bestseller. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, I'm ready to. I think I'm just going to go and get in a fight right now. See if I can apply all these steps. Name it, explore it, commit. Oh my gosh. Wow, Joelle and Bob were awesome. I hope you guys got as much out of this episode as I do in two really practical ways. One is how you think about conflict and maybe your ability to have a little more tolerance, right? I mean, of course, the book is called Conflict Resilience, Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. But I hope that you can show up to conflict differently. I know this is something I've been working on for a long time, which is why I was so excited to interview these guys and excited to read the book. And I hope that the practical tips that Joelle and Bob offered are ones that you can literally start to use today. And whether it's a cyclic sigh, taking that pause, and honestly, recognizing that being comfortable with discomfort can be a superpower and a way to transform your life. So I wish you luck, and I hope this show made a big difference in your life. That's it. If you are not subscribed to this show, I hope you will, whether it's on podcast, it's YouTube, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. As always, I would love your feedback. You can email me at gettingopen@yourtango.com. And lastly, I'm always so grateful for your comments. Wherever you leave them, I read them all, and it just means so much to have you tuning in. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.